Go ahead when you're ready, Paul.
Hey, welcome everybody. Glad to have you joining us today for another installment of our Coping with COVID webinar series. Hopefully you've been following along the last several weeks as we've introduced several topics that are, we believe, of great value to small business owners as they try to make heads or tails of what's going on during this time period where their businesses are being impacted greatly. My name is Paul Kinghorn. I'm with the Center for Business Growth and Innovation at the University of Northern Iowa. Thank you for joining us there. Also in conjunction with our Advanced Iowa program, we're hosting these webinars. Remember that you can not only watch us live, all these webinars are being recorded and archived, so you can go back and look at them at your convenience and then share them with others that you know would find them of value. So as today's setup, the topic we're addressing is making bankruptcy a last resort. So to give you a little heads up on how we came to this topic, the Iowa Economic Development Authority commissioned the University of Northern Iowa, our Institute for Decision Making on our Strategic Marketing Services, to do a survey of Iowa businesses that were impacted by the COVID-19 crisis and see what that impact looked like, and then use that data to help them formulate better policies and programs that could respond to and help them with their operations. Now, as a side note, next Monday, if you join us on the 13th of April at 10 a.m., we will have the results of that survey. Many of you probably would have taken, and some of the impact that we found from that. So one of the things that came from the survey comments that individuals made had to do with bankruptcy. In fact, one that was very touching specifically said, can you recommend a good attorney? When you hear that kind of, those kind of comments, you know for a fact that it's impacting these small businesses in a very real way. Now, I want to make sure that we understand the information that we're going to share today is not intended, nor should it be considered legal advice. It is for informational purposes only. Everyone's situation is different. We recommend that if you are worried about the solvency of either your business or your personal finances, you should contact an experienced bankruptcy attorney as soon as possible. So with that as the header, let me introduce Jeff Getz, who is with the law firm Bradshaw & Fowler. He heads up their bankruptcy division and is, I'm told, by several peers out there in the industry, one of the premier bankruptcy attorneys in the Midwest. Jeff, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Paul.
So a little side note that's probably worth noting to many of you don't realize that in addition to the regular professional staff we have working in our centers, we employ the services of several students to help and assist in the work that we do. And you've had the benefit of having one of the students work with you on a project. You can attest to the impact and the value that they bring to helping do the work that you need, that we serve the businesses and by extension Iowa's economy. The reason I bring that up is one of our students, and this was not planned, I'd reached out to Jeff last week and he graciously agreed to join us. One of our students by the name of Sophie Troxel happens to be Jeff's niece. And she texted me a message on Sunday, hey, my uncle's gonna be on with you next week. We didn't make that connection. So there's a little bit smaller universe out there, I guess, than we otherwise thought. Well, anyway, so let's get to the topic, making bankruptcy a last resort. So Jeff, I want to lead with, as an experienced attorney who's dealt with a number of bankruptcy situations, what one or two pieces of advice do you have that you, for these business owners, that you wish others would have known earlier on that might have changed, how they approach bankruptcy or their need for it?
Sure. Thank you again for inviting me here today. I think there's, in these very trying times during the COVID-19 pandemic, I think for the purposes of this discussion, it's important to separate those businesses who were either in financial distress or approaching financial distress for any number of reasons prior to the pandemic, versus those who are now just facing for the first time, you know, prior to the pandemic, they had healthy, productive businesses, but the global impact on so many aspects of our daily lives, and especially business and the economy in general, these businesses are now facing questions that they never had to talk about or think about. And I think it's important to distinguish between the other ones that were in financial distress before and those afterwards. I will tell you very frankly that with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic and bankruptcy practitioners like myself, we don't have a clear written playbook, so to say, or guidebook, because this is so new and the situation is so fluid and dynamic on a daily basis. I've been very frank with folks that I've been consulting with over the last month or so. And basically, I'm trying to rely on providing good, sound, almost common sense business advice and counsel. With regard to bankruptcy, I want to be clear right off the bat. The word bankruptcy means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to distinguish between bankruptcy and reorganization. Reorganization is a part of bankruptcy, just like liquidation is a part of bankruptcy. We often hear the word bankrupt and think, oh, business is gone, they've closed their doors, and that's far from the truth. What we find is that bankruptcy or straight bankruptcy or the type of liquidation that most people think of, that really is truly a last resort, whether for an individual or for a business. What we're mostly talking about in my field is reorganization. And there are many different paths to reorganization. And some of those paths, again, are through outside of the court supervision under the bankruptcy code. Those we would refer to out-of-court workouts. But before we get too deep into that type of details of Chapter 11 bankruptcy reorganization, I guess the most important things that I would want to advise your constituency to is that we know that Congress has acted. A lot of people wish probably sooner rather than later, but they have acted. And there are a couple of programs out there that all small businesses, whether you are in financial distress or approaching financial distress, or even as healthy as possible from a business perspective, that you inform yourself what resources are out there. There are state resources, which I'm sure you can speak about more than I can, but there's also the main programs that most people are hearing about in the news for business is the Payroll Protection Program, commonly referred to as PPP, and also going by several different names, but what I'm referring to as the Small Business Administration debt relief or COVID relief program, which is mostly grants and loans administered through the Small Business Administration.
You're talking about the CARES Act, right?
Excuse me?
The CARES Act, the official.
Right. The CARES Act is the umbrella act under which there are a lot of different things, but the two most popular ones being discussed right now for the business community are the PPP and the Small Business Grant and Loan Program.
Perfect. So I just want to remind all the viewers, the attendees, that we are taking questions. So if they have any questions that they would like to ask of Jeff, he's happy to answer them for us. Just go ahead and type them into the chat box, whether you're viewing it on Zoom or on Facebook, and we'll get those questions in here, and then we'll get them over to Jeff. So we were talking earlier about some of these programs, and there's some question around qualification, right? So depending on where you are, either currently, let's say prior to this crisis, you're having some problems, you alluded to that group of individuals, and whether or not they qualify for some of these assistance programs. And of course, if you've just now been dealing with the implications of the crisis and maybe haven't fully realized the impact yet, there's some other issues that pertain to that. So help us a little bit with what your knowledge is about. You were previously in a tight situation, maybe even had started to formally go through these bankruptcy processes. How do they apply to, or do they qualify for some of these programs?
Sure. I think the first thing that I would say is there's a wide range of businesses, size, and types of businesses. In my experience, I found that most businesses, even some of the smallest ones, often employ or seek the advice and counsel of an accountant, whether it's a tax accountant or an accountant doing your business. Most of the programs out there right now and that require application, I'm finding that most people first go to their accountant or financial advisor to help them through that process. Now, again, in theory, the application process is designed to not require an attorney or an accountant. But for those who are unsure about the information that needs to be provided, my recommendation is first, if you have any questions or you have any concerns, you may want to first go to your accountant or bookkeeper who you work with. Obviously, many businesses have a bookkeeper or financial department or office. So a lot of folks can do that internally, but I'm speaking about the smaller businesses that might not have all those resources. The applications are available online, I believe, and you want to make sure that your application is as complete as possible. I've heard anecdotally at this point, there's some rough spots in some of the application process, and there are some questions. For example, one question that I've seen in several of the listservs that I'm following is that it's not abundantly clear that the programs will be available to companies in bankruptcy or approaching bankruptcy. And therefore, there's discussions about if a business needs to seek relief under the bankruptcy code, that maybe you want to get the application in process, get your money in advance, and then go into bankruptcy. I'm not sure of the logic behind disqualifying or potentially disqualifying companies that would be seeking relief under the bankruptcy code to preserve value, to keep their business alive, who would benefit from the payroll protection program or the Small Business Administration grant and loan program. But I'm not here to talk about Congress's logic. My hope is obviously that there will be further changes to some of the interim rules that will clarify whether companies in bankruptcy or approaching bankruptcy reorganization, like Chapter 11, would be able to seek this particular relief. So in a general sense, again, there's no written playbook for what we're doing right now other than common business sense. And again, working with those resources you already have. Again, many businesses will need to go a step up and seek legal advice because of their particular position. And in those circumstances, I wouldn't hesitate to reach out to either a business if they have general counsel or outside counsel. Again, many small businesses operate as corporations or LLCs, and many of those had used an attorney, at least in the beginning, to form that LLC or their corporation. Those attorneys would be more than happy to take former clients' calls and advise them on the process if that's necessary.
Perfect. So again, just want to remind everybody, we're talking with Jeff Getz, who's with the law offices of Bradshaw Fowler. He serves as their division head. What's your official title?
I'm chair of the bankruptcy practice group at the Bradshaw Fowler Proctor and Fairgrave law firm in Des Moines and Marshalltown.
Perfect. I didn't want to elevate you or diminish your title. I know that you have a great deal of experience, and we appreciate you joining us here today. I want to remind everybody, if you have questions, feel free to send them our way. And Jeff will attempt to address those as best he can. So we do have one question, Jeff, that came through our Facebook feed. How does going through reorganization affect the future ability of a company to borrow capital?
Well, what I would tell you is that corporate entities don't have the same things consumers have in terms of credit reports or credit scores. The closest thing that most businesses have is the financial reporting done by Dun & Bradstreet. But that doesn't really affect many small businesses as much as it does large businesses. The viability of any business that may need to seek relief under the bankruptcy code, and specifically Chapter 11 reorganization, is very, very particular to that particular business. There are many factors that are taken into consideration, and probably one of the biggest ones is if there's not a reasonable belief, understanding, or ability to eventually emerge from Chapter 11, then you have to seriously consider whether it's worth the time and the expense associated with reorganizing. What I would tell you, though, is that most businesses that do successfully reorganize go on successfully in the future. I guess I would use the biggest examples as airlines. Almost all the major US airlines over the last 20, 30 years even have gone through a Chapter 11 reorganization. And you'll note that, for those who remember, they never stopped flying. It's interesting now that the airlines are still available, but their flights are pretty empty. And the hope is that they will also benefit from some of the relief to save core American industries, but I diverge. The question is, if you go into Chapter 11, what's the chance of success? It's hard to say because everybody's case is different. I would tell you that anecdotally, here in Iowa, we have a pretty good success rate of seeing businesses through Chapter 11 reorganizations and emerging and continuing to operate. What I would tell you is some businesses do a true reorganization in which they get a little bit of relief from their creditors for a period of time to give them breathing room to prepare a plan of reorganization that will potentially modify or reorganize their finances, but also sometimes their business operations. The other type of Chapter 11 that's very common is a sale process, an orderly sale process. We know that in a foreclosure or liquidation where hypothetically a bank takes its collateral, its assets, and sells those, they don't get much for those assets. Those are basically sold at essentially fire sale prices. Whereas through the Chapter 11 bankruptcy process, if it's possible to do a sale, you can sell or attempt to sell the business, substantially all of its assets, as a going concern, free and clear of all liens, claims, and encumbrances, to a new owner, and thereby keeping the business alive, keeping the employees employed, contributing tax dollars to society. There is a hurt. Very often that's either the equity or the unsecured creditors or sometimes secured creditors. But it's a process. It's an orderly process, and it's been around for a number of years. And it's, believe it or not, an integral part of the nation's economy.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that. So you had alluded to earlier about information, right? And how important it was in reaching out, whether it's to a resource partner like an accountant or an attorney that might have a relationship with and helps you. A lot of our listeners are small businesses, and sadly, information is not that well tracked, defined. What would be your advice if they don't have nice, neat, orderly records and they're finding themselves in this kind of a pinch? I mean, is there some suggestions that you can give them to help them through the process, or at least be thinking about being more proactive as opposed to reactive, waiting until the decisions are made from them?
Sure. I guess my ultimate motto is you want to have as much information as possible, as many facts as possible, because it's the data that should drive all of your decisions, whether financial decisions or business decisions. And we hear the word data very often. You reference sometimes folks' financial records are not in top shape or prepared according to generally accepted accounting principles. Those are the kinds of things that sometimes I recommend clients take a step back, do almost like a personal inventory or a business inventory of, what are your pluses, what are your minuses, what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses. If, for example, your business is, the small business is suffering, you want to know, was it suffering before COVID, or is it a result of the more recent last 4 to 6 weeks of events? Obviously, if you're going to have to deal with your personal or financial business life, you really do have to get your financial books and records in order. I can't tell you how many times I've consulted, whether it's a small business or farmer, and I ask if they do their bookkeeping and accounting in a software program. And some of them hand me a 3-ring binder or a spiral binder with their handwritten notes in pencil. For some businesses, that's okay, but it may not be providing you with the data that you need in order to prepare yourself and develop a strategy and implement an action plan. If you don't have a balance sheet, if you can't generate one from a software program, or be able to look at a profit and loss statement. Again, not every business requires this, but most of them do require a certain minimal level. And again, I've seen the full range of evidence out there, and everybody needs to look at their own situation individually. You mentioned a good point, though. At what point should they act? I would say act sooner rather than later. Act immediately. If you don't know where to go, ask. I know I've seen a number of places on the internet and elsewhere, billboards. Look to the helpers. And the helpers can be anywhere. It doesn't have to necessarily even be your accountant or your lawyer. It could be anybody. So what I would say is seek help, get the data, make sure you're comfortable with it, that it's sound, and then use that to make the best informed decisions you can.
Perfect. Another quick question for you from one of our viewers. So they say after talking with a banker or bookkeeper, Is it ever too late to start the bankruptcy process? They want to make sure that their chances for filing some form of protection isn't time-based, or they've lost the opportunity to do that.
What I would tell you as a general rule is that seeking advice and counsel regarding bankruptcy or just financial issues in general, doing it sooner rather than later is always most advantageous. And the reason for that is simple. When somebody comes to me saying, I need a bankruptcy, there's a sheriff's sale of my home tomorrow, there's very, very few options available. Whereas before it gets too bad, if you talk with an attorney or an accountant, or in many circumstances, I don't even start with a client. I refer them to a financial advisor because, again, not for every small business, but for many medium and larger businesses here in Iowa, the advice, counsel, and assistance of a financial advisor is very often a first step. And I say financial advisor in the context of not mergers and acquisition for healthy businesses, but financial advisors whose skill set is specifically for financially distressed businesses that are experiencing cash flow problems or problems with taxes or problems with their secured creditors or problems with their general unsecured creditors not being able to pay in the net 15 or net 30-day period. So there are a lot of resources out there, and I understand a lot of people don't know where to look. So if you need a first call, I'd be happy to take your first call. And if it requires a recommendation, I'd be happy to give you one.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that. So we're coming up at the bottom of the hour. I appreciate your time, all those that have taken their time to listen to and participate in this webinar. Just want to remind everybody, we are doing these webinar series, Coping with COVID, as a service to the small business community across Iowa. We are doing at least 5 a week, generally right now in the 10 o'clock hour, but if that doesn't work for your schedule, know that they're being archived and you can come back at your convenience. If you go to either cbgi.uni.edu or advanceiowa.com, you'll be able to find links to that information. So Jeff, we've got his contact information here on the screen. Any last quick question or comments that you want to make that you think that the viewing public wants to be or should be aware of that would help them?
Well, yeah, not so much legal as much as please shelter in place and wash your hands with soap and water for 20 seconds at least. Again, these are very trying times. I know our law firm and all my legal lawyer colleagues here in Des Moines, and I'm sure around the state of Iowa, are ready, willing, and able to take telephone calls from their customers, their clients, and are prepared to provide the type of advice, counsel we need in these very trying times.
Well, thank you, Jeff. We appreciate that. We appreciate your time and that of your firm, Bradshaw, Fowler, Proctor, and Fairgrave, for allowing us to have this conversation. Remember that there are resources. You made the comment earlier, Jeff. I want to reiterate. There are resources both in the private sector and the public sector out there willing, ready, and able to serve small businesses. Sooner you reach out, the better we'll be able to connect you to these resources and help get the assistance you need. So everybody, thank you for today. We'll look forward to having you join us on one of the future upcoming webinar sessions. Be safe and God bless. Thanks.
Thank you very much.